Lewis Porter is a renowned jazz pianist, composer, and scholar known for founding the world's first master's program in jazz history and research at Rutgers University. He holds advanced degrees in psychology, counseling, music theory, and musicology, and has taught at institutions including Tufts, Brandeis, NYU, and the New School. As a performer, he's worked with Terri Lyne Carrington, Dave Liebman, Vijay Iyer, and many others, appearing on over 38 albums. Porter is also the acclaimed author of John Coltrane, His Life in Music, and numerous other influential books on jazz. He's also the author of Playback with Lewis Porter on Substack, and we are live. Lewis, thank you for being here. Good to see you.
Thanks, Abe. It's a pleasure to be here. A lot of my friends are in your series.
It's very important that we have these conversations, and I knew you were someone I definitely wanted to talk to. To be completely honest with you, I am also probably have that love of John Coltrane being my favorite musician, and
Sure.
recorded on so many of my favorite records and transcribed a lot. But what was the first moment for you listening to the actual records where it hit you in a way that you knew this was something that was going to be part of your life's work?
Well, it's funny because I knew I wanted to be some kind of musician from the age of 10. From 14, I knew it was jazz, but it was people always think it's Coltrane or Rollins. There's no dichotomy there, and it was Rollins that I was crazy about in my teens. I did have a Coltrane album because I got it for $1.50, and it was Coltrane Sound, which is a fantastic album on Atlantic. And I really liked it a lot, but at that point I wasn't yet a Coltrane fanatic, and I guess it won't surprise people that it was the album of Love Supreme that turned me into a fanatic. Now, by that time, I was already in my late 20s. I think I was 27, and I was listening to the album for the umpteenth time, but this time it really spoke to me. And I particularly heard, and this is something I've written about, I heard him reading the poem on his saxophone in the last movement of A Love Supreme. I actually heard those words, and I said, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Then I knew I wanted to do some big project on Coltrane. I didn't know at that point that it was going to be a PhD degree and a book and all that.
Yeah, you're certainly someone, when someone wants to get information on John Coltrane, you're one of the first people that your name comes to their mind.
I get a lot of calls and emails, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So as far, but you're also a renowned pianist. So it's got to be sort of a balancing act, so do you play every day? Do you still make it part of your daily routine to practice and make sure that you're performing? So talk to me a little bit about piano in that way.
Well, I do play every day. Piano was actually my first instrument was violin for 2 years. Not my choice. It was actually my older brother was taking piano lessons, and he didn't want me in his way. So he persuaded my mom. He said, "What about violin?" Because he's a classical guy, so he wouldn't have thought of saxophone or something. In college, I did take up the alto sax, but piano was my first jazz instrument in any case. Eventually, I didn't have time for the sax anymore when my kids were little. But the truth is, people always ask me, how do I balance it? I have to say, and how do you manage to be so productive and all this? It's not so simple. I have not had an easy time of it, and I don't have a magic answer to that. I looked back at the books I published. I'm either author or co-author of 7 books. And I only realized when I looked back, I said, wait a second, every one of these books was finished when I had a sabbatical. I had a semester off from teaching. Duh, because otherwise you're never going to finish a book while you're teaching full time, which I was doing for many years. And the other thing is that there was a period, specifically when I was finishing the Coltrane book, so it was, let's say, early 90s, and my kids were young, that I was not practicing piano enough. And what really killed me is people started to notice it. I'd be on a gig and they're like, Lou, you sound a little rusty or something. What's going on? So what happens is I made a promise to myself about 30 years ago. I said, why is it that I am so obsessed with handing in paperwork on time or handing in an article on time? when every time I did that, the person said, wow, you're the only one who handed it in on time. So finally it hit me, why am I prioritizing that when playing music was always my first love? So I made a commitment to myself 30 years ago. Yes, I will practice every day, and I have since that time. Unless you're so sick you can't get out of bed. But other than that, I have done it every day, usually for half an hour, sometimes for 2 hours. But even if I can only get in 10 minutes, I decided better to get in some time every day. And the other thing is I'm a very organized practicer. I have my own idea of what I'm not good at. And if I have 10 minutes, I go right there. I don't say I'm going to play my favorite song that I've played a million times. I say I'm going to work on that weakness that I know I need to work on.
For me, doing the podcast has certainly changed the way I approach my instrument, just because there's just not enough, the hours I put into podcasting. I just, those hours were, spent practicing. But I do feel that a stronger connection to musicians just on a human level from all these different conversations, especially when they open up. So has your work, as an author or educator, like, did it complement your playing? And I know you said, people said you were rusty, but were there certain things about it that when you look back on, you say, you know what, that made me a better player in some respect?
Well, in the long run, yes, now that I'm been practicing all the time. But I would say, yet people always say to me, gee, it sounds like your style is kind of hard to place. It sounds you're informed by a very wide range of things. And the funny thing about influence, you probably know this as a musician too, it's not always something you're totally aware of. It's like, there used to be a clarinet player around New York named Sol Yagged. His dream was to play like Benny Goodman. He did play like Benny Goodman. Okay, that was no secret. But I always say, think of it as a mathematical thing. The more people that you listen to, the less chance you're going to sound like one in particular one. And I've listened to everybody and deeply. I mean, I talk about King Oliver's recordings with people that specialize in that. I know those records very well. So I think it does help. And people always say, well, it sounds like you're informed by, I hear everything in there from Errol Garner to Earl Hines to Bud to Chick to Lenny Tristano. And I never even thought about that. In fact, people always used to ask, well, who are your main influences? Like, I don't know. I really did not have an intelligent answer. But by them saying to me, wow, you reminded me of Chick right there, it finally hit me. Yes, Chick Corea is definitely one of my, especially the era of, now he sings, now he sobs, But it's not only Chick, it's a lot of stuff.
No, that's such a great answer. Because I feel as a guitar player, like I love John Scofield, but I also love Pat Martino and Grant Green. You just take from everywhere. And it sounds to me like you're open to all these different subgenres of the music and dichotomies, as you said,
They all sound great to me. It's like I was listening to King Oliver records from 1923, and my friends were like, what are you listening to? These scratchy old records, but they all sound great to me.
I also wanted to ask you about, the direction of jazz. You're someone I actually have, this is a very specific question I'd like to ask you based on all of your research, how jazz has evolved over recent decades, mainly since in the 2000s to present. And what do you really see in its future trajectory?
I'm going to give you kind of a strange answer to that, but you see,
please.
This is something I've thought about. I have my series, Playback with Lewis Porter, and I write about all kinds of things. But one thing I like about having my own series is if I'm not ready to make the case for something, I don't put it out there. But I'm going to make the case for you because this is conversation, It's a funny thing about jazz because it evolved. Now we're at a point, I don't see it evolving much differently from where it is now. And I wonder if looking back on it, we're going to say jazz evolved rapidly for the first roughly 100 years, and then it kind of found itself, and there it is, and that's what jazz is. I just, every time that, let's say, use the word avant-garde every time. I was friends with Ornette, by the way. I loved him, and I've done a lot of gigs with free improv with the so-called downtown crowd. They all know me down there. Of my 38 albums, I think 15 of them are free improv albums with some of the downtown cats. So I love that stuff, but that has never become the mainstream of jazz, and I don't think it ever will. I think people like to swing. They like to, I love to work over changes. I really do. There's so many things you can do over changes. It's endless. And so I am wondering, and the next, 30, 40 years will bear this out, if jazz has finished evolving and what you hear is what you get.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. I feel there's only 12 notes, and a lot of the way people study the music is through transcription and going to hear music, but to really develop your own voice is probably that's the hardest thing, as they say, and there's going to be so much failure to do that. But is that really sometimes I think about that's the only way we're going to see new musicians who have their own voices. But I understand, I agree with what you're saying. I think we'll see new musicians who sound like themselves, certainly, but people don't understand the failure that goes into sounding like yourself and wanting to sound like yourself and playing ideas that you hear that you never stole from anybody, just certain things on your instrument. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. You're making some great points. Just yesterday, I was listening to an interview with Elvin Jones. This is something I'm going to post in my series too. No one's heard this, but it was interesting. One of the questions was, how did you develop such an individual voice? And his answer began with, well, I wasn't really aware that my voice was that individual. And I think that's true for all of us. It was people coming back at me and saying, gee, you sound a little different. Even when I was around 20, I remember people saying that to me. And I was like, really? It wasn't like, well, I'm glad to hear that because that's what I've been aiming for very consciously. You can't make it happen. If it happens, it happens. But thank God, yes, it happens with a lot of young players.
So as far as jazz education, it's still evolving today. I mean, I've seen it firsthand, going through the institutions. What are some ways that you've seen it change, since you began teaching, and where do you see the education going?
Yeah, I went to meetings. It used to be called the National Association of Jazz Educators. Then it was international. Then there was some kind of huge financial screw up and they went out of business. Now it's JEN. But when I first went in '83, it was mostly white Midwestern band directors and some award-winning high school band directors. And it wasn't really about jazz history, and it certainly wasn't about the Black tradition. It was about, hey, what are some good charts I could buy for my kids that are, cute swinging charts, but not too hard, but they sound good. It was very practical, and it wasn't really about being an artist. I guess you could say it was more about the craft of working in a big band. And what happened over the years, more Black educators joined, and actually there was a movement. There was kind of almost like a protest movement where they said, we need more Black involvement in jazz educators. What's going on here? Eventually, there was a Black president of the organization and so forth and so on. But so that's one thing that changed, is an awareness that it's not just a question of how to make your school's student band sound good, but that you're supposed to be connecting with a whole tradition. And that's why it is a great thing that Lincoln Center has this Duke Ellington series where they give charts for free to bands all over the country, and they're transcribed from Duke Ellington records. They say, teach your kids these charts. I mean, that's one way. If you give it to them for free, they figure, what the hell, I'll try them, And so that, I guess I would say, is the main thing. Now, of course, one objection some people say, but it's too much that. Now they're like, if you don't play like Louis Armstrong, there's something wrong with you. I mean, no one's going to play like Louis Armstrong today unless they're in a revival band or something. And by the way, Earl Hines is one of my all-time favorites, and I told you sometimes people hear a little of it in there, but if I played exactly like Earl Hines, we'd be back to that same problem of no individuality. So the main thing I see is this respect for and awareness for tradition, but the difficulty is how still it's today that you're playing the music. You're not playing it back then.
But there are those musicians who they want to go into the performance and academic aspects of which is great. I think, just to be multifaceted. What guidance or advice would you give to those younger people who want to explore both, you think?
So I think you mean to have a career, maintain a career in both.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have to say a lot of that, I'm going to talk just from the professional, practical point of view, a lot of that depends on the institution you're working for. And some institutions will put up a job description and it's teach, write, and there's no mention in there of perform. Mm-hmm. Some of them will say, we expect this person to maintain a performing career. But if they don't have that in the job description, you kind of have to argue for that. You have to make a case for it. Wait till they make you an offer, wait till they say yes, and then say, okay, then we need to talk about something, because I need a situation where occasionally I'm going to be out of town, but in a responsible way. I'm not going to be out much. I'll take gigs mostly between semesters. I'll take gigs on weekends when I don't have classes. Can we work this out? So I'm going to say a lot of that is something you have to work out with your employer, because not all employers are open to that, I have to be honest.
Yeah. And also there's the whole other side to it. I was talking to, do you know Barry Green, the guitarist?
I don't know him personally, but he is a marvelous player. I really like his playing.
So we were talking.
Have you ever studied with him?
No, I never studied with him, but we were talking on my podcast, and
oh, beautiful.
He was telling me that, once he retires, that his job probably won't exist. And then, 5 months later, probably about a month ago, I just found out my college teaching job, they're phasing out the arts department in 2 years. So there is that trend that's going on too, which is, it's concerning for the younger musicians, because they get into this thinking they want to be an educator. I mean, do you think we're going to see more of that? Or are we going to see some pushback and almost, protest against it? Because I mean, it's so disheartening to find out that they're phasing out the arts department. Like that's incredible.
Yeah, I saw him perform up here, but most of the time I think he's in Florida, right?
He's in Florida, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he's a marvel. I wish more people knew about him. He's just terrific.
Oh, he's amazing.
But yeah, he does a lot of teaching. And today we're in an odd situation. Nobody is going to kid themselves that in this era you're going to make a living off your recordings or off of gigs, unless you're Herbie Hancock or something like that, is a whole different thing. But for most of us, that's not going to happen. So everybody wants to teach. Well, of course, what's the problem? If everybody teaches, who are you teaching? Where are the students? And I can't say that I see the answer to that, except that people have to really be open to alternative careers. As you mentioned, and I appreciate you mentioning, I started the only jazz history program. It was at the master's level. What are my students doing? Some of them are teaching part-time at colleges and gigging. Now that works, because then you always have time for gigging. You don't make as much, but that's one solution. Some of them have a very busy private studio practice with students, and they're gigging. One got excited about the archivist side of my teaching, the research side, and he became an archivist, get this, for the Metropolitan Opera. Isn't that incredible? Wow. So they're surprising. Several of them said, I really want to be in academia full-time. They went on and got their PhDs elsewhere. My program didn't offer we didn't have the certification or whatever for that. And now they have full-time jobs in academia, but that's not for everybody. I'm going to tell you from experience, a full-time job in academia. Once I went in for my annual physical, and the nurse was writing things down before the doctor came, and she said, "What do you do?" I said, "Music professor." She said, "A professor? Oh, that's a very stressful life." I said, "How did you know that? Most people say, you're so lucky you don't work 9 to 5." She said, "My father was a professor, and he was working from the minute he got up till the minute he went to bed, 7 days a week." I said, "Now you know what my life is like."
Yeah.
So it's a tough scene, and I don't know yet what the answer is going to be to that. But unfortunately, in the United States, as you and I both know, if anything is considered expendable, it's always the arts that are expendable. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. Just, even in, with kids who want to learn music, people that, their parents worry that they're going to want to be a musician or something, but they don't realize they're accessing parts of the brain that coincide with math and just focusing on your concentration. And then just the like people don't understand how vital it is. I mean, and how it is one of the funnest things you can do.
I know a number, I could probably think off the top of my head of a dozen respected jazz performers who have a day job doing something with computers or software. Because you're right, the brain qualities interact. So that's another idea for musicians as an alternative to saying I need to teach.
Yeah, I heard Dave Liebman say in an interview, go for the double major if you're gonna if you want
That's
to be.
interesting.
That's what
Yeah,
he like.
Dave.
That's why, and I definitely appreciate that. Just
By
because.
the way, Dave and I worked on his memoir together. It's called What It Is, The Life Story of Dave Liebman, and then it says with Lewis Porter. So we're good friends.
Beautiful. I mean, that's so fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about Playback with Lewis Porter on Substack. If you could, give us sort of the Reader's Digest version about starting it and everything.
So what happens in my books, one of the reasons people are interested in my books is I do my own research. I don't just repeat what you've read 100 times. And I'm also the kind of person that someone will say, jazz started in New Orleans and it went up the Mississippi to Chicago. I'm the kind of person that say, well, wait a second. I don't think the Mississippi goes to Chicago. I'm the guy who will always put a kibosh on that, and then I'll think it over and say, well, okay, not entirely true, but the truth is almost always more nuanced than what people say. It doesn't mean sometimes it's totally wrong, but not always. So people who studied with me actually have been saying, all this stuff you showed us in class, you've never published it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing any more books. They said it doesn't have to be a book. The long and short of it is, it was my former graduate students that persuaded me it would be good to start putting my research up in essays. So I put an essay up approximately once a week, sometimes more than one a week, but never longer than a week in between them. And I'm getting a great response. I have every essay gets between 5,000 and 8,000 international readers. And I have, by the way, huge in Europe. They know me very well. I can't explain why, but they love my work in Europe. And I've toured Europe as a single, where I play with the local rhythm section in the evening and then teach during the day.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so they know me over there, and I just post whatever I happen to be working on. So, in fact, let me just look at what I posted recently. I posted an essay about this recent film about the murder of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. And you might say, well, why am I writing about that? Well, because during that time, Louis Armstrong performed there, and that becomes part of the story. But as I showed in my research, the story that they told in the documentary was false. They didn't tell the truth about what happened. So that's one essay. I posted a new biography of Freddie Webster, legendary trumpeter, where I proved, sometimes I surprise myself, I proved that both the date and the place that they always list for his birth were incorrect.
Oh, wow.
So everybody's like, I can't believe this. I've posted 9 essays about Coltrane, which is all research since my books came out. I posted 15 on Billie Holiday. People don't even know I'm a Billie Holiday nut since I was 15. I've got research on her that's never been published in any of her books, and it's in those essays. And already I only started this in 2022, September, and already two of the essays have won national prizes. So the response is great, and it's free to subscribe. There's an optional paid level, but I don't want to do all this research and people don't get to see it. So I'm not hiding the research. The paid level, you get bonus materials.
Oh, okay.
But you can always see the complete essay for free. And so I encourage anyone who's interested in jazz history. You never know what I'm going to put up there. And I find that people are, I put up a printed interview with Lenny Tristano that was never published. And I got comments back from longtime students of his saying, this is unbelievable. This really sounds like him. So you never know what I'm going to put up there.
No, Louis, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for, taking the time to speak with me today. And it was great. I can't thank you enough.
Well, listen, it's entirely my pleasure, and I really appreciate you asking me to do it. And I'm sure we'll be running into each other in the future.